There's a moment most men miss. It happens in the silence between her laughter and her breath. Subtle. It's not something she says aloud, but it changes everything. When she leans in, whether lightly or heavily, and rests her body into yours, she's not measuring the strength of your arms. She's measuring the depth of your presence. She's listening for something you're not even aware you're communicating. That hug is not about comfort. It's a doorway. She wants to know who you are without your name, your plans, or your smile. She wants to feel what you haven't said, sense what you can hold without flinching, and taste the stillness behind your posture. If you think she falls for the words you speak, you've misunderstood her language. What stays with her isn't verbal. It's energetic. It's not charm that unlocks her heart. It's stability, the kind that doesn't declare itself but proves itself in silence. The way you hold her says everything. A man's embrace reveals the truth he doesn't yet have words for. If you're tense, distracted, or performing, she'll feel it before you do. Her intuition is sharp enough to catch what slips through the cracks in your expression. She won't always confront it, but she'll remember it. Her body records these moments, and she learns who you are not by what you promise, but by what she feels when you're near. You think she's analyzing your appearance. She's actually measuring how deeply you've made peace with yourself. She senses when a man is fragmented, when he's trying to impress, when he's afraid of being still. You can't fake presence. She knows when you're trying to gain approval. She's been touched by men who never actually arrived. They were there in body but not in being. And it left her emptier than she was before. The men who move her don't rush. They don't grip. They don't ask for her vulnerability while avoiding their own. They carry a calm that isn't fabricated. It was carved into them through experience, through their willingness to sit inside the emotional winters they couldn't escape, until they no longer needed to. When a woman leans in, her body is not just looking for warmth. It's asking whether yours is a safe place to let go. And that answer isn't found in your muscles or your promises. It's found in your nervous system. Are you stable without her validation? Are you calm without needing her attention? Can you touch without trying to take? If your arms say yes, she won't have to ask. She'll soften. Her breathing will shift. Her shoulders will begin to unlearn everything the world taught her about mistrust. But if your energy is demanding, even subtly, she will recoil even if she's smiling. Emotional safety is not a term. It's a transmission. You become that transmission not by learning techniques, but by removing your masks. When you've faced your own ache without running, when you've met your shame and stayed present, when you've grieved your way into wholeness, you become someone who no longer panics at her depth. You don't freeze when she shows emotion. You don't change the subject when her voice breaks. You don't fear the tears. You understand them. And in that understanding, something rare happens. She stops guarding herself. Not because you told her to, but because your presence gave her permission to. Men often believe they need to entertain, to impress, to lead every moment. What they don't realize is that most women aren't waiting for a performance. They're waiting for resonance. They want to feel themselves in your presence without distortion. They want to open, but they can only do so when what they feel from you is grounded and clean. Many women have opened themselves to men who couldn't hold that space. Men who loved their bodies but ignored their spirits. Men who could speak affection but couldn't carry the weight of emotional reality. The result is always the same. She retreats. Not necessarily in body but in soul. She'll play along, but part of her will be gone. You won't see it immediately. She'll still smile. She'll still answer your calls. But the part of her that falls in love, that intuitive, quiet, spiritual part, will be elsewhere. That part only returns when it senses truth. Not logic, not technique. Truth. And truth isn't something you recite. Something you embody. When you hold her, and she feels no agenda, no rush, no insecurity to compensate for, she meets herself in your presence. Not the version she learned to perform. The version beneath all that. The one that longs to exhale. And it's in that exhale that everything changes. Not because she thinks you're perfect. Not because you did anything extraordinary. but because your arms didn't ask her to be anything other than what she was in that moment. You weren't trying to win her. You weren't trying to fix her. You were simply there. Without needing to be seen, without needing to be validated, without needing to rescue anyone. You were steady. And that steadiness, real, grounded, earned through your own internal journey, is what rewrites her nervous system. That's what makes her come back to the thought of you at night. Not because of what you did, but because of how you made her feel. Not excited, not impressed, but understood. That's the kind of feeling she doesn't forget. The kind that reaches past attraction and taps into memory. Into something older. Something she didn't even know she needed until she felt it. But you can't create this kind of connection from desire alone. Comes from your relationship with stillness. If you don't know how to sit with yourself in your own moments of fear or sadness, you'll always interrupt hers. You'll flinch. You'll distract. You'll reach for control when what's needed is surrender. Most men fear that if they stop performing, they'll be forgotten. But performance doesn't inspire trust. It inspires distance. Real connection begins the moment you stop trying to be someone. That's when she sees you. That's when her heart listens. That's when she begins to imagine staying, not because you've convinced her, but because your presence invites her truth out of hiding. And once that happens, she doesn't just see you as a man. She sees you as a space. Refuge. A person who doesn't need her to be anything but real. That's not chemistry. That's transformation. But here's what you must understand. This kind of presence cannot be manufactured. It is a byproduct of the work you've done with yourself. The hours you've spent sitting in silence. The honesty you've had with your own longing. The courage it took to walk through your own emotional fire instead of numbing it. When you've done that work, your energy changes. Your eyes soften. Your voice slows. Your touch loses its urgency. You stop needing outcomes and start noticing moments. That's when you become unforgettable. Not because you tried to be, but because most women have never felt this level of peace in another human being. You become the quiet in her chaos, the anchor in her storm, and not because you rescue her from anything, but because your presence reminds her that she was never broken to begin with. She doesn't need your protection. She needs your clarity, your emotional integrity, your capacity to hold what's raw without tightening. When you hug her and nothing inside you moves out of fear or need, she lets go in a way that surprises even herself. That's the shift. That's what opens her. That's what leaves an imprint. And if you've been wondering why certain women lose interest after the third or fourth encounter, if you've been asking yourself why your charm fades so quickly, it's not because something's wrong with you. It's because the part of you that shows up is still wearing a mask. And she can't fall in love with a mask. No one can. But when you step into presence with nothing to prove, and everything to feel, you no longer chase connection. You create the conditions for it to emerge on its own. That's the power of a real embrace. It's not an invitation for her body. It's an awakening of her soul's memory. It reminds her of what it feels like to be met without defense, without pretense, without performance. And in that remembrance, she doesn't just fall for you. She falls back into herself. Fully. Fearlessly. Finally. She won't say it out loud, but if you pay attention to her silences, you'll hear the echo of it. The way her breath pauses when you pull her close. The way her body hesitates before leaning into yours. These are not just reflexes. They are reflexes born of memory, of men who held her too tightly without ever noticing who she was inside the skin. The truth is, most women don't even expect to be understood anymore. They've trained themselves to accept fragments of attention, brief flashes of tenderness, and to call that love. They've learned to stay quiet about their needs, to pretend they're fine with shallow intimacy, and to carry the weight of emotional depth alone. So when you hold her differently, not with pressure, not with hunger, but with a presence that doesn't try to mold her, it unsettles her. Not in a bad way. In a way that disrupts everything she thought she had to be in a relationship. A woman knows what it feels like to be desired, but being felt, being sensed without having to explain herself, that's a different realm entirely. Most men never enter it, not because they're incapable, but because they've never been taught to feel themselves. They're chasing a connection they don't yet know how to give. You can't create resonance with another person if you've silenced your own. You can't hold her emotional body if you're still running from your own. The stillness you bring to her is the stillness you've cultivated in yourself. And that doesn't happen through willpower. It happens through surrender, through facing the emotional debris of your own life and letting it shape you into someone grounded enough to hold space for another without losing himself in the process. She wants that from you, whether she says it or not. She wants to feel that when she breaks down, you don't panic. That when she tells you something difficult, you don't retreat. That when she leans on you, your foundation doesn't collapse. And she will test you, not out of cruelty, but because every part of her has been trained to protect her softness. She's not looking for perfection. She's looking for consistency. For that quiet stability that doesn't spike when things get hard, and doesn't disappear when things get real. This is where most men fail. Not because they don't care, but because they haven't learned to stay. They haven't learned to remain emotionally available when their ego is bruised, when their control is threatened, or when they feel powerless to solve what isn't meant to be solved. She doesn't want you to fix her feelings. She wants you to feel them with her. If you're uncomfortable with emotion, she'll feel the gap between you the moment you touch her. She'll sense the distance in your hug. Not physical but energetic. She won't explain it. She'll just start to withdraw. Slowly. Silently. Sometimes without even knowing why. But when your embrace carries the weight of real emotional presence, her body responds before her mind does. Her guard lowers. Her breath deepens. Her nervous system begins to relax. And in that moment, you become more than a man in her life. You become the rarest thing she's ever felt, a witness who doesn't turn away. You might think that this kind of connection is about being gentle, being romantic, being attentive. And yes, those things matter. But none of them work without depth. None of them matter if you haven't built an inner core strong enough to contain intensity. Hers and your own. She wants to know that when she's in pieces, your arms don't flinch. That when she's not performing, your interest doesn't fade. That when she lets go of her image, you don't try to reassemble her into something more comfortable. And you can't fake that kind of presence. It comes from hours you've spent in solitude. From the tears you've allowed without running. From the shame you've met without self-loathing. From the parts of yourself you've sat with until you no longer feared them. That's what makes you trustworthy. Not your words, not your promises, but the inner gravity you carry that tells her without explanation, "You're safe here." When a woman feels that, something ancient opens inside her. It's not just romantic interest. It's not infatuation. It's cellular, spiritual. She starts to imagine a life where she doesn't have to armor up every day. A life where softness is no longer a liability. A life where she can rest her spirit without fearing it will cost her. That kind of experience imprints itself onto her soul. And here's what you need to know, it's not about frequency. It's not about seeing her every day or texting her good night. It's about the quality of the moment. The presence you bring. The way you make time feel different when you're with her. She will never tell you this directly. But it's what she craves more than anything else. To be held by a man whose silence says, "You're not too much." To be touched by someone who's not trying to take. To be known in a way that doesn't require her to shrink or explain. That's not affection. That's healing. But understand, this kind of connection doesn't come without cost. It demands more from you than charm. It demands that you show up not just when it's easy, but when it's uncomfortable. That you stay emotionally open when everything in you wants to shut down. That you don't make her vulnerability about your discomfort. If she cries and you pull away, even subtly, she will feel it. If she opens up and you change the subject, she will learn not to trust you. And it won't matter how much you tell her you care. Because love without capacity is just sentiment. The capacity to hold her in all her forms. Joyful, angry, afraid, uncertain. That's what separates the man who's remembered from the man who's replaced. And it starts with something as simple as a hug. A moment where she gives you a glimpse of who she is beneath the surface. and watches to see how you respond. If you rush it, you lose her. If you make it about yourself, she closes. But if you hold that moment without interruption, if you simply stay, you'll feel her open in ways that words can't reach. That's when the shift happens. You go from someone she likes to someone she trusts. And once she trusts you, real intimacy begins. Not the kind that fades with routine or stress, but the kind that deepens with time because it's rooted in something unshakable. She will stop guarding her feelings. She will speak without rehearsing. She will lean into you not out of need, but out of choice. And every time you hold her with that quiet presence, she will fall deeper. Not into you, but into a version of herself she didn't believe she could be with a man. That's the secret. She doesn't fall for you. She falls for who she becomes around you. When you create space for her emotions without trying to categorize them, when you respond to her silence without trying to fill it, when you touch her with awareness instead of impulse, you become more than a partner. You become a catalyst. But to offer that, you must become deeply familiar with your own inner world. Not just the parts that are polished, but the parts that ache. You must hold your own grief the way you would hold hers. You must walk into your own emotional depths and come out not with answers, but with understanding. That's the man she falls in love with. Not the one who fixes. The one who feels. So if you want her to remember you, if you want to leave an imprint that lingers long after the moment has passed, if you want to be the reason she finally stops running from herself, don't try to impress her. Hug her. But do it from your center. Do it without demand. Do it as if nothing else in the world exists. And in that moment she will believe you. Because she won't fall in love with your charm, your ambition, or your image. She will fall in love with your emotional integrity. The way you held her, even when she couldn't hold herself. And once she's felt that, nothing else will compare. If you felt something shift while listening, it's not by accident. Most people go their whole lives reacting instead of reflecting. They touch others without ever learning how to be touched. But awareness begins in moments like this, when a message speaks to something you didn't have words for until now. This channel is built for those who are done living on autopilot. For those who want to understand their patterns, confront what's unresolved, and learn to connect without losing themselves. Every video is an invitation to look inward, not for inspiration, but for recognition. If that's the path you're on, or the path you're ready to walk, subscribe. Stay connected. The work begins when the noise fades and the truth finally has room to surface. There's more coming, and it's made for those who are ready to feel fully and live with intention. Welcome to the Stoic spirit.